When Jordan Hayes walked into Carson Jiu-Jitsu, they didn't see a woman. They saw a target, a black veteran in a white-dominated gym where smirks spoke louder than slurs and silence was its own kind of weapon. They thought she came to learn. What they didn't realize was she'd already survived wars more brutal than their egos, mocked, tested, and provoked. Jordan didn't just fight for respect, she exposed a culture built on quiet violence and systemic power. And as her presence peeled back the layers of their brotherhood, it revealed something far more dangerous beneath. One by one, those who tried to bury her truth would learn the cost of underestimating what they tried to erase. What secrets lie beneath a gym that trains more than just technique, but protects a legacy of silence? Stay with us to know how it ends, and tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. The afternoon light bent low across the cracked asphalt, thick clouds hanging just above the skyline like judgment. The parking lot of Carson Jiu-Jitsu was nearly full, flanked by rows of identical trucks, each one matte black or American flag wrapped, each one humming with the same message. This place belongs to us. From the curb, the red brick facade of the gym looked modest, unassuming, but the silence in the air said otherwise. This was not just a place to train. It was a place where unspoken rules decided who walked in welcome and who walked out broken. Jordan Hayes sat quietly behind the wheel of her car, engine off, hands still on the steering wheel. Her hoodie was plain, the kind you buy in bulk. Her sweatpants bore no logo. She wore no makeup, no jewelry, no statement, except for her presence. Her eyes locked on the front entrance as if calculating trajectories, that old reflex from a life lived elsewhere. Combat zones didn't always have fences or uniforms. Sometimes they wore badges, sometimes black belts. She saw them before they saw her. Two men stood outside near the door, laughing between drags of vape smoke. One of them leaned against a police-issue SUV, arms crossed, wearing civilian clothes but holding himself like he expected a salute. Officer Brent Kessler. She knew his type before he opened his mouth. The other, broader and balding, wore a gym-branded hoodie and a scowl dressed as a smile. Coach Rick Carson, a local legend in his own echo chamber. Their laughter stopped the moment they noticed her stepping out of the car. She didn't flinch. She didn't speed up. She walked the exact pace she had always used when stepping into rooms where she wasn't supposed to survive. Brent elbowed Carson with a smirk. Didn't know we started accepting tourists from the south side. Carson chuckled. Maybe she's just lost. Google Maps likes to play jokes. Jordan kept walking. She'd heard worse from men with louder voices and smaller souls. She passed them without a glance. But something in the set of her shoulders said it clearly. I heard you, and I'm still walking in. Inside. The gym was alive with sound. Bodies thudding against mats, fists hitting pads, music with no melody pounding from a Bluetooth speaker near the wall. The smell hit next. Sweat, disinfectant. Blood not fresh but still remembered in the air. She stepped toward the front desk, where a young man with bleach blonde hair sat scrolling on his phone. He didn't look up. I'm here to sign up, she said calmly. The kid, Troy, according to his name tag, looked up, eyes raking over her in a way that wasn't curious. It was categorization. She saw the checklist in his mind. Woman, black, alone. His lip curled slightly. Are you sure you're in the right spot? Her voice didn't change. I'm sure. He shrugged, not meeting her eyes, and slid a clipboard across the counter. Fill it out, waivers on the back. Coach decides who stays. As she filled out the form, she felt it. The stares, the static tension that creeps in when someone walks into a space they weren't expected to occupy. Laughter dulled, conversations paused. Even the sound of gloves hitting pads seemed to retreat as eyes pivoted toward her back like scopes finding range. She turned the form back to Troy, who looked at her name and let out a snort that wasn't quite a laugh. First class is free. After that, You pay or you're gone. Understood. She nodded. She moved toward the mat space. As she stepped through the door frame into the open-floor dojo, the atmosphere thickened. It wasn't just testosterone, it was ownership, the kind that doesn't like being questioned. She didn't need to hear the comments. She saw them form before mouths opened. A room full of men trained to dominate, now quietly calculating the easiest way to dismiss. A voice from the back called out, full of artificial sweetness. You lost, sweetheart? Zumba's next door. There was scattered laughter. Jordan didn't respond. She stood at the edge of the mat, motionless, waiting. Coach Rick Carson finally approached. He moved like a man who never had to explain himself. His gut stretched the seams of his rash guard, and the black belt around his waist looked more ceremonial than earned. Well, he said loudly, arms folded, looks like we've got a new face. You trained before? Jordan met his eyes. Some. He laughed at her. Some. He repeated, glancing at his students for a shared smirk. We'll see what some means. This isn't a self-defense boot camp. No trophies for showing up. He turned to the class. All right, boys. Looks like someone's got something to prove. Let's see if she makes it to warm-up. She moved with the group as they began rolls, shrimps, and technical drills. Her movements were efficient, too precise for a beginner, but no one said anything. Either they didn't notice, or they didn't want to admit what they saw. When Coach shouted for partners, they scrambled into pairs. She was left standing alone. Brent, still in uniform pants and a department tee, was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching her like a predator sizing prey. Troy pulled off his hoodie reluctantly. Guess I'm stuck with you, he muttered, stepping forward. Their drill began. She adjusted, adapted, and responded with the kind of precision that doesn't come from cardio classes. Troy got frustrated, applied more pressure, slid in an elbow a little too rough, dug a forearm where it wasn't necessary. She didn't complain. She just kept moving, kept breathing, let him show who he was. By the time the drill ended, she had already drawn the eyes of 3 higher belts. They didn't say anything, but they were watching now, differently. Brent stood near the corner, arms still crossed, his jaw tight. She ain't gonna last, he said to no one in particular, but his voice carried. Coach shrugged, let her burn herself out. They always do, but deep down, somewhere in the parts of them that understood control when they saw it, they already knew. She hadn't spoken more than a dozen words, but in the way she moved, the way she refused to break posture, the way she walked into a room built to break her and didn't blink, they knew she wasn't the kind to back down. She was here to stay, and that scared them more than any submission hold ever could. Jordan signed the waiver, tied her belt, and stepped onto the mat, into a place where skill was supposed to speak louder than race, but only if you weren't black. Jordan signed the form and stepped into class, where skill was supposed to speak louder than color. Unless, of course, you weren't white. Jordan stepped onto the mat like a soldier crossing enemy lines, silent, deliberate, uninvited. The rubber beneath her feet held the sweat of 10,000 past battles, each drop marking a moment of triumph or failure, dominance or submission, but none of those battles had been hers. Not yet. She took her place at the edge, facing the sea of GIs and belts moving in rhythm. The room buzzed with the ritual of warm-ups. Bodies sprawled, shrimped, rolled, and recovered in near silence. But as her presence registered, the cadence began to falter. Heads turned, conversations stalled. The room didn't stop for her. It recoiled. She joined the movements, mimicking the drills she'd known for years but hadn't touched in many more. Her rolls were controlled, not showy. Her shrimps were fluid, not rushed. Her limbs moved with the memory of precision, not the need to impress. She didn't look around. She didn't smile. She didn't seek anyone's gaze, but they were all watching. Coach Carson paced across the far end, arms folded, pretending not to notice. But every few seconds, his eyes darted toward her. He saw the way she moved, not hesitant, not new. There was no awkwardness, no delay, no panic. He hated that. When the warm-ups ended, pairs formed quickly, like magnets snapping into place. Each student found their partner with the ease of routine, locking in hand slaps and fist bumps, shifting into position. Jordan stood alone. Coach didn't say a word. Neither did the students. She looked around once, not pleading, just confirming what she already knew. No one wanted to pair with her, not because they feared she would slow them down, but because they had already decided she didn't belong here. Troy pulled off his rash guard with a theatrical sigh, tossing it on the bench. "Coach, I'll show her the basics," he said, loud enough for the room to hear. Coach nodded without a word. Jordan met him at the center. The first drill was a simple pass from a closed guard. Nothing fancy, just positioning, control, transitions. But Troy didn't teach. He dictated. "You're going to want to open your legs like this," he said, grabbing her knees roughly. "Keep your elbows in. Not that it matters, but at least try to look like you're paying attention." His breath smelled like energy drinks and cheap sarcasm. Jordan didn't speak. She adjusted, letting him go through the motions. Then they switched. As she slid into position, her movement was quiet, composed. She broke his guard with textbook timing, passed cleanly to side control, and stabilized the position with almost surgical weight placement. Troy's expression changed, just slightly. "Lucky," he muttered, pushing off to reset. They went again. This time, he came in harder, driving his forearm across her neck like it was a barbell. She shifted, posted, and escaped. Again. By the third repetition, several pairs nearby had stopped drilling entirely. Their eyes were locked on Jordan, not in curiosity anymore, but in disbelief. Something wasn't adding up. The new girl didn't move like a newbie. She didn't flinch, she didn't fumble, and she definitely didn't fold. A brown belt with cauliflower ears leaned over to his partner and whispered, "You seein' this?" His partner nodded slowly. Across the mat, Brent Kessler sat on a bench lacing up his ankle supports, watching with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked at Coach and gestured toward Jordan with his chin. Coach didn't respond. The class moved on to positional drills. Troy paired off with someone else. No one stepped forward for Jordan, so she drilled alone. Mount transitions, side control, north-south. She flowed between them like a metronome, her timing steady, her breathing calm. Her gi clung to her skin, damp with sweat and effort, but she didn't show fatigue, just focus. A voice from the far side called out, mocking, "Yo, is she auditioning for a YouTube channel or what?" Laughter scattered across the mat. "Bet she falls over if you actually put weight on her." Somebody toss her a participation ribbon, but no one stepped forward. Not one of them dared to test that theory. Coach Carson finally blew his whistle. Partner switch, live drilling, let's go. Pairs reformed. She remained solo. Coach stared at her. His lips thinned. There was tension in his jaw, the kind that builds behind a clenched smile. "Brent," he called out, without looking away from Jordan. "Help her out." Brent stood slowly, cracking his knuckles one by one as he crossed the mat. He stopped in front of her, towering, chest puffed just enough to make the point. "Well," he said with a grin, "let's see if the hype matches the attitude." Jordan didn't blink. She extended her hand. He slapped it, then gripped her wrist just a beat too long. She pulled back, slipped into stance, around them. Drills faded into silence, one by one. Students paused, eyes shifting toward the center. Coach narrowed his eyes. He was starting to understand. This woman wasn't here for novelty. She was here for something far more disruptive. Brent rolled his shoulders, smirking like the match was already over. Coach Carson gave a slight nod from the sidelines. "Let's see what she's really made of." He didn't send Brent to train with her. He sent Brent to break her. The moment Brent Kessler squared up in front of her, The energy on the mat shifted. It wasn't just that he was a cop, everyone here knew that. It was that he moved like someone who believed the rules never truly applied to him. His feet dug into the mat with the arrogance of power unchecked, and his eyes bore down on Jordan with that familiar cold gleam, the look of a man who saw her not as an opponent, but as a disruption, something that needed correcting. Coach Carson gave a nod from the sidelines, arms folded across his chest, watching with the calm of someone who had just pressed a silent alarm and was waiting for the crash. Starting with takedown entries, he barked, flow drills, then live reps. Pairs around the mat returned to motion, foot sweeps, single legs, trip entries, all the foundational movements that Jiu-Jitsu adapted from wrestling and judo. But at the center of the room, Jordan stood across from Brent, and everyone's peripheral vision began drifting toward them. They slapped hands, bumped fists, the standard greeting. Then Brent leaned in, and his voice dropped low enough for only her to hear. "Out there, people like you don't get back up." Jordan said nothing. Her face didn't change, but her spine straightened just slightly, and her fingers twitched with restraint. The drill began. Brent shot in with a level change too fast for a warm-up. He didn't grip her hips. He slammed into them, lifting and driving forward like a linebacker trying to make a point. Jordan posted out, stopping her fall with a graceful sprawl, her left leg extending just in time to avoid being dumped directly onto her back. She landed in turtle position, rolled through, and reset. Brent grinned, just making it realistic. They reset again. This time, it was Jordan's turn. She faked a collar tie, stepped to the outside, and reached for an ankle pick. Brent countered with a hard cross face, a forearm shoved across the face just under the nose. More pain than control, more ego than technique. He used his weight to drive her down again, not into position but into pressure. She rolled, fluid, calm, but the damage was done. Around them, Cody Bell had paused his own drill, eyes flicking nervously toward their exchange. He was barely out of high school, still a white belt, the kind of kid who watched quietly, memorized everything, and rarely spoke. His partner said something, but Cody didn't answer. His attention was locked on Brent's knee now grinding into Jordan's thigh. Another rep. Brent grabbed a collar, yanked it tighter than necessary, and drove his shoulder into her jaw as he transitioned to a body lock. This wasn't sparring. This was suppression. Jordan's breath stayed steady, but her eyes had changed. Behind the calm, behind the stillness, there was fire now. Not rage, no reaction. Readiness. Brent's voice found her ear again as he clamped her wrist into a controlling grip. You'd be surprised how easy it is to disappear someone who resists. It was more than trash talk. It was a threat wrapped in experience, and he delivered it with the comfort of someone who'd gotten away with worse. Still, Jordan didn't flinch. The drill moved forward. Now, live reps. Coach Carson called out the rotation, 30 seconds each side. Work for the takedown. Begin. Brent stepped forward again, already in control mode. He lowered his stance, faked a snap down, and exploded into a body lock. But Jordan pivoted, dropped her hips, and slipped her arm through under his shoulder. He adjusted, pressing forward, trying to muscle her into the mat. She allowed just enough give to bait him into overcommitting. He took the bait, and in that one breath, the balance shifted. Jordan locked in a butterfly hook with her right foot, used her grip on his collar to anchor, and twisted her torso with precision. The movement was clean, fast, a sweep so sharp it took his feet off the mat. His back slammed the floor harder than he expected. For a moment, the gym froze. Someone dropped a pad across the room. The slap echoed. Brent sat up, his face red, not from impact but from being watched. Coach didn't say a word. Jordan stood over him, not triumphant, not smug, just steady. Her hand reached down, offering the same reset gesture everyone used. Brent ignored it. He stood on his own. Cody exhaled, like he'd been holding it for far too long. His partner nudged him, whispering something about that sweep. Cody didn't respond. Around the gym, other students were watching now with different eyes, not the mocking glances of the first hour, but the narrowed, analytical looks of people who realized they'd misread the board. Coach Carson walked closer, jaw tight. He'd seen enough. He turned toward Brent, voice sharp but falsely casual. "Let's switch it up. Go coach the new guys. I'll pair her up next." Brent stared at Jordan a moment longer before walking off, each step louder than necessary. Coach turned to her. "That sweep," he said, voice low, "not something beginners usually know." Jordan just looked at him. "Maybe I'm not a beginner." Carson's eyes narrowed. This wasn't a mystery anymore. This was a problem. She was skilled, controlled, and unshaken, and every second she remained, she dismantled the culture he had built. One rule, one posture, one technique at a time. He'd sent Brent in to humble her, but Brent had hit the mat, and the mat doesn't lie. Cops use techniques to control. She used technique to survive. One of them would break, and it wasn't going to be her. When Brent turned his back to reset, Jordan moved, not out of anger, but calculation. Her sweep dropped him flat, loud enough for the whole room to hear. He hit the mat harder than his ego could take. The locker room smelled of sweat, disinfectant, and tension. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold, pale sheen across the tiled floor and dented metal lockers. The training had ended, but the real friction was just beginning to settle into the air like fog. Jordan sat on the wooden bench, slowly unwrapping the tape from her fingers. Her knuckles were flushed and raw, but her breathing remained calm, controlled, not just because of the discipline she had been drilled to maintain, but because she had lived through far worse. Pressure was familiar, so was silence. The door creaked open behind her. Cody stepped in, holding out a half-melted ice pack wrapped in a clean rag. "For your shoulder," he said, voice low, not quite meeting her eyes. She took it without a word, pressed it gently against the spot where Brent had driven his shoulder a little too hard during the earlier round. It wasn't badly bruised, but it was a reminder. And reminders, she had learned, were just another kind of map, markers of the terrain she was walking through. Cody shifted nervously from foot to foot. He looked like he wanted to say more. His gaze flicked toward the door, then back to her. "I just wanted to say," he started, then stopped. Jordan raised her eyes. Cody inhaled. Brent's not the kind of guy who forgets getting shown up, especially not like that, in front of everyone. Jordan didn't blink. She knew the type. Men who wore their power like armor and treated humiliation like an act of war. Brent hadn't come to spar. He had come to assert control, and he'd been dropped flat in the middle of his domain. "He's not gonna let it go," Cody added. "Guys like him, they find a way to make you regret it. Not always here, sometimes out there." Jordan tilted her head. "Out there?" Cody nodded. "He's a cop. I know. He's that kind of cop." She let the silence do the asking. "He's been in trouble before," Cody said. "A few times, actually. Use of force stuff. Mostly with black folks. Nothing ever stuck. Internal affairs dropped it. The union shielded him. Classic." Jordan absorbed that, not surprised, just informed. Then, from beyond the thin locker room wall, a voice cut through the muffled shuffle of bags and banter. Brent's voice. "Who the hell does that black bitch think she is?" Cody froze. Another voice, laughing. "Maybe Troy, maybe someone else." Brent continued. "Louder now. She walks in here like she owns the place, doesn't say a word, and then pulls that, what was that, even? A sweep? Where'd she learn that? YouTube?" More laughter, but there was an edge to it, uneasy. Like the room didn't know whether to cheer him on or step away. "You ask me," Brent added. "Someone needs to remind her where she really stands." Jordan's jaw didn't tighten. Her breath didn't hitch, but in her eyes, the temperature dropped. Not from fear, from clarity. Cody glanced toward the door, then back at her. "You should be careful," he said again. Jordan gave a thin smile, the kind that didn't need to be warm. "I am," she said. "He's the one who isn't." Outside, the chatter continued, Brent's voice now fading, replaced by the hum of post-training routines, keys jangling, flip-flops slapping on tile, bottles rattling into duffel bags, but the tension remained. Jordan didn't move. She sat in that small, humming silence, not because she was frozen, but because she was listening, not to them, to herself. She had heard that kind of laughter before, the kind that didn't start in amusement, but in discomfort. It was the laughter of white boys who mistook their dominance for culture. It echoed from high school gym bleachers where her body was too strong, too fast to be palatable. It came from army barracks where her rank meant nothing next to her skin. It clung to briefing rooms where her strategies won missions, but her voice never won credit. And she knew, in the world Carson built, no one was ever allowed to win if they were different. The room was barely lit, just a low amber hue spilling from the single lamp on the kitchen counter, casting long shadows across the walls of the apartment, like a quiet testimony to everything she had endured but never spoken aloud. Jordan didn't move for a long while. She sat still, as though waiting for the stillness itself to say something. Her body was tense, but not from the soreness of training. It was the kind of tension that lived in the bones, the kind that accumulated not from motion, but from memory. Her bag sat by the door, still zipped. The GI inside was damp with effort, with humiliation she didn't name, with restraint she didn't deserve to carry. But she had carried heavier things. Identity. She rose slowly and crossed the room toward the wooden cabinet tucked into the corner. It was old, military-issued, edges worn down by years of movement, distance, and dust. It had followed her from base to base, from war zones to safe houses, never once opened by anyone but her. Inside it, she didn't keep medals. There were no accolades, no flags folded in ceremonial triangles. What she kept was simpler, but heavier. She opened the cabinet and pulled out a sealed box, black, scuffed, the latches still tight. She set it down gently, not with reverence, but with the kind of measured calm that comes from knowing exactly what lives inside something. When she flipped the latches and lifted the lid, the air shifted. The past was no longer abstract. It was tactile. There it was, a belt, not one for sport or display. It wasn't wrapped around white uniforms or earned through point systems and stripes. It bore no name, no rank, no logo, just a coarse fabric, tightly woven and blackened not by dye, but by history. On one end, barely visible under the years, was a worn tag, stitched in with deliberate anonymity, SP0, Spectre 0. It wasn't issued. It wasn't meant to exist. No photographs had ever captured its use. No ceremony had ever marked its receipt. It belonged to a unit that had no name on record, a program designed for missions that never made it into official memory. The kind of work you did when the country wanted deniability more than justice. The kind of work you walked away from without ever admitting you were part of it. She held the belt in her hands like it was a lifeline. In a way, it had been, not because it kept her safe, but because it reminded her who she had once chosen to become. Behind the belt, tucked underneath a folded desert camo shirt, was a photograph. Its edges were softened, a slight crease through the center where time had folded it against truth. Two people stood in frame. One was her, 10 years younger, her hair pulled back into a tight braid, jaw clenched with resolve. The other was Elijah, her brother, taller, leaner, smile wide like he still believed in the mission. His arm was over her shoulder. Her fist was clenched at her side. Behind them, the Syrian sun scorched the sand in pale gold. That was the last photograph ever taken of them together. A week later, he vanished. She ran her finger across his image and exhaled slowly, like it might call him back across the void. There was nobody there, no dog tags, just the word, inconclusive, and a final report buried under national security layers she'd been told never to question. Killed in action, they said. Highly classified, they added. No further details. But she had never believed in ghosts, and Elijah, as far as she could feel, wasn't gone. He was just out of reach. The worst part of grief, she had come to understand, wasn't the pain. It was the doubt, the space between knowing and wondering. The kind of doubt that makes you flinch at shadows and lose sleep over echoes. The kind of doubt that makes you stare at your reflection and ask, over and over, who you've become since the day everything was taken but nothing was explained. She wasn't grieving, not anymore. She was sharpening. They thought she came to this gym to learn how to grapple, how to fall safely, and how to tap before the break. But what she was really doing was remembering, reclaiming, reforging. Every roll on that mat, every choke she escaped, every breath she stole back from someone trying to smother her. That was practice, but not for the belt they wore. She wasn't training to be a better student. She was preparing for the day the past came knocking. And it would, because the system that stole Elijah didn't know how to bury its mistakes completely. And when it slipped, when it finally left a door ajar, she would walk through it, and she would not come quietly. She looked down at the belt in her lap again and whispered something she hadn't said out loud in years. "You're still out there, aren't you?" The room didn't answer, but something inside her stirred. That instinct, the one forged in war, in field work, in fear, it whispered back. She folded the belt carefully, not like an heirloom, but like a weapon. She placed it in the bottom of her gym bag, underneath the crisp white G and the soft towel still damp from her last training session, not because it belonged there, but because she did. And this time, she wasn't going back into that gym as a newcomer. She was going back as a memory they didn't know how to classify, as a question they couldn't answer. As a woman, they couldn't break with silence. Her phone buzzed. A class reminder from Carson Jiu-Jitsu, drill night, takedown techniques. She zipped her bag closed, picked it up, and stood at the threshold of the apartment for a long moment. The lamp flickered behind her as she turned the lock. She was going back to endure, to re-enter the ring, not for sport, but for alignment. Because every roll, every glance, every pushback from men who refused to see her humanity was just another note in the song of something much bigger. They thought she came to learn technique, but she was retraining herself for war, one that would never be fought on clean mats or under fluorescent lights. The floor of Carson Jiu-Jitsu had always felt like a proving ground, but tonight it felt more like a silent battlefield, one disguised under clean mats, forced laughter, and the artificial neutrality of sportsmanship. The kind of battlefield where no one raised their voice, but the message still came through with perfect clarity. You don't belong here. Jordan stepped onto the mat with quiet resolve. She bowed as instructed, not out of reverence for the space, but because she knew the rituals mattered, especially when the room was waiting for her to forget them. Coach Carson's voice rang out from the sideline. "King of the Hill," he announced, tapping the timer on his clipboard with that calculated smile he wore when pretending to be impartial. "Winner stays in. Rotate every 3 minutes." The class gave a collective nod, already familiar with the drill. It was simple. One grappler remains in the center while fresh opponents rotate in, each trying to submit or exhaust the one who stays in. Designed to sharpen endurance and situational pressure. In practice, it rewarded those who could maintain dominance without collapse. But tonight, it was weaponized. Jordan was sent in first. She blinked once, nodded, and crouched into her base stance. The first opponent was a blue belt named Marcus. Quick, lean, eager to prove something. He lunged for a collar grip, pushing forward with an overzealousness that betrayed his nerves. Jordan absorbed the momentum, redirected it, and transitioned to a butterfly sweep that left him flat on his back in seconds. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat, she just reset. 3 minutes passed, another body rotated in, and then another. They came one after the next, some technical, others sloppy, all determined to test her, and not in the spirit of camaraderie. This wasn't about improvement, it was about attrition, a systematized wearing down of the one person in the room they hadn't welcomed. They didn't need to say it out loud. The message was in the rhythm. No water break, no switch out, no word from the coach, just endurance without end. Off to the side. Brent sat with one leg stretched across a bench, half lacing his shoes with mock casualness, his voice cut through the grunts and breathless shuffles like a serrated edge. Let her tap, he called out, half laughing. Then send her home. A few chuckles followed, not loud, not bold, but enough to echo. Rachel Carson, coach's niece, and a purple belt known for her balance and form, stood with her arms folded. She didn't laugh, she didn't speak, but her eyes tracked every exchange on the mat. And when Brent spoke again, this time muttering, "She can't last another 5. Rachel's jaw flexed, but she said nothing. Jordan noticed. She noticed everything, and still, she didn't stop. The 6th roll was with a brown belt, gritty, heavier, and aggressive. He tried to stack pass into side control, forcing his shoulder into her face. She turned her hips, created just enough angle to wedge a knee in, then trapped his arm and inverted into an armbar. He resisted. She didn't overextend. She held, calculated, adjusted pressure. The tap came late, not out of respect, but reluctance. 7 opponents in, no reset. The gym grew quieter, not out of support, because this wasn't what they expected. The quiet black woman who didn't smile, who didn't brag, who didn't ask to be noticed, was still there, still unbroken. Carson didn't stop the drill. He didn't call time. Instead, he looked down at his clipboard, then at her. The look wasn't congratulatory. It was diagnostic, as though he'd miscalculated something and didn't like the result. Jordan crouched again, waiting for the next opponent. Her breathing was steady. Her wrists ached. Her ribs throbbed from a stray knee. But her mind was clear, and inside that clarity was something ancient and indestructible. Purpose. She was studying the system, the bodies, the rhythm, the silence. Cody stood near the far wall, holding the timer now, his expression tense. He'd seen enough to know what was happening. His eyes darted toward Carson, who still hadn't called the drill, then to Brent, who looked vaguely irritated, like a plan had misfired. Rachel finally stepped forward and asked quietly, "Isn't it time to switch up?" Carson didn't answer, but he clicked the pen on his clipboard, and that was enough. Jordan's time in the center was over. No nod of recognition, no good job, just a click, a shift, and a new name called into the center. She walked off the mat, slow but upright, no limp, no sign of exhaustion. Brent muttered something under his breath. Jordan didn't look at him, because she hadn't come to win. She had come to understand exactly how far they were willing to go to erase her presence, and tonight they showed their hand. They didn't need to strike her to try and erase her. They weaponized routine, silence, and protocol. But Jordan wasn't breaking. She was studying, and tomorrow, when she returned, she wouldn't just step back onto the mat. She would begin reclaiming every inch of it, not with rage, but with precision born of survival. She didn't need to win anyone's applause to know she'd just made a statement. Jordan moved through the locker room like she did through every battlefield in her past, measured, intact, and always with one ear tuned to what came next. She'd felt it earlier on the mat. The tension wasn't gone. It had only changed shape. She reached her locker in the back corner, unzipping her gym bag with a slow, quiet rhythm. Her hands moved instinctively. Wraps off, guy folded, bottle capped. Her body ached, sure, but her mind was sharpening. This wasn't just about Jiu-Jitsu. It hadn't been from the beginning. And tonight, after that drill they thought would wear her down, They had started to realize that too. She heard the door before she saw him. Brent's boots hit the tile floor with the same kind of swagger he brought into every room he wanted to own. But this time, it was quieter, controlled. A man who had something to say and needed it heard in private. He leaned against the row of lockers to her left, not looking at her right away. He pulled out his phone instead, scrolled a few swipes, and turned the screen toward her. A photograph. A young black man, face pressed into a patrol car hood, hands cuffed, nose bleeding. Brent's thumb tapped twice. "That one gave me a hard time," he said, voice casual. Kept shouting about rights he didn't have. "You know how it goes." Jordan didn't respond. She didn't even look up, just continued tying her drawstring with calm, precise movements. Brent took a step closer. "He reminded me of you," he said, voice low now. The look, the stare, like he wasn't afraid, like he thought being quiet made him safe. He paused. It didn't. Still nothing from Jordan. That seemed to bother him. He shifted again, this time closing the distance. "You think this mat gives you power? Does winning drills mean anything out there?" His tone turned darker, like concrete beneath a boot. "Out there, people like me don't need to tap. We don't need to ask." She finally glanced up. Her gaze was even, controlled. There was no fire in her eyes, just clarity, and that was what unsettled him the most. Brent tilted his head. "You don't scare easily. I respect that. But you should know something, since you're new around here." He lowered his voice to a whisper. "Sparring has rules. Streets don't. The next time you embarrass me in front of that room, I won't wait until we're on the mat." Jordan turned slowly. Her face stayed calm, but every inch of her body shifted as if measuring his weight, his center of gravity, the distance between his threat and her options. And yet she said nothing, not because she was intimidated, but because some men aren't worth answers. Behind the cracked door of the trainer's office, Cody froze. He had stepped inside earlier to grab his phone charger and overheard just enough to stop in his tracks. His hand trembled now, fingers gripping the device, thumb hovering over the screen. Record, just in case. He'd never seen Brent like this before. Not even in sparring, not even when bragging in the parking lot. This wasn't the smirking alpha act. This was different. This was personal. Jordan finally spoke, quietly. "You think your badge gives you immunity." She wasn't asking. "You think because no one's held you accountable, that means you're untouchable." Brent smirked. Not untouchable, just unbothered. She stepped past him without another word. As she walked, she didn't look back, but her voice reached him before the door shut. "I wore a uniform too, only mine was built for survival, not submission." The door clicked behind her. Brent stood frozen for a beat, then scoffed, shook his head, and pocketed his phone. Cody didn't move until he heard Brent's footsteps fade toward the showers. His thumb finally tapped stop. The voice memo saved itself with a timestamp. Brent, locker room, threat. He exhaled hard. It wasn't just that Brent had threatened her, it was how he said it. Like it wasn't the first time. Like it had always worked before. Cody sat down on the bench inside the office, staring at the recording. His thumb hovered over delete for a second, then moved to backup. He uploaded it to a hidden folder in the cloud and made 2 copies, one on a flash drive, one on a burner email, because he knew what came next wouldn't be fought with fists. Jordan was waiting by the vending machine, sipping water like nothing had happened. Her breathing was slow, her posture relaxed, but when Cody approached, she could see it in his face. He handed her the flash drive without a word. She nodded once, pocketing it. "You heard everything?" she asked quietly. Cody swallowed every word. She looked out through the glass toward the dark parking lot. "Then you need to understand something," she said. "If Brent gets pushed too far, he won't talk. Next time, he'll act." Cody hesitated. "Shouldn't we tell someone?" Jordan looked at him fully now. "Who? His precinct? The same one that clears every complaint? The same men who slap his back after he roughs up kids who look like me?" Cody had no answer. Jordan put a hand on his shoulder. You did the right thing, but keep copies. Hide them in places that don't trace back to you. This doesn't end here. She turned and walked out into the night, where streetlights blinked over empty cars and silence sat heavier than threat. She had fought wars in countries that didn't put her name in their reports. She'd learned how to survive men like Brent Kessler long before he ever stepped on a mat. But what made him dangerous now wasn't his size or strength. It was the system that raised him. The system that cheered when he pinned and looked away when he was crushed. He thought power came from the badge. She knew power came from what survived its weight. Under the bright LED lights of Carson Jiu-Jitsu, the mats had been scrubbed twice. The air smelled faintly of bleach and sweat, a sterile mask over something feral beneath the surface. It was challenge night, Coach Carson's favorite spectacle. The kind of event where pain was ritual and pride was currency. No one came here to learn. They came to conquer. Logan Page stood center mat, rolling his wrists with the relaxed precision of a man who knew he would win before the first grip was made. Broad-shouldered, clean-cut, and adorned with a black belt that had soaked more blood than polish. He wasn't just a fighter. He was a symbol. Carson's golden boy. The one who got the posters, the private students, the whispered reverence, and tonight, the one randomly chosen to spar with Jordan Hayes in a live drill. Jordan stepped onto the mat without expression, but everyone saw the stiffness in her movements. The bruises from last week's King of the Hill hadn't faded. Her right side was still tight from a hip sweep gone wrong. Her knuckles wrapped, her eyes alert. She wasn't here for glory. She was here to finish something that started the moment she walked through Carson's front door. As the buzzer echoed, Logan didn't hesitate. He closed the distance fast, grabbing for an underhook with the confidence of a man who thought this would be over in seconds. His weight drove forward, and Jordan stumbled back. The crowd murmured. Jordan's footing was solid, but Logan's pressure was heavier than she expected. He dropped his hips, went for a cross-collar grip, then spun her down with a sharp inside trip that drove her shoulder into the mat. "You sure you want this?" he hissed under his breath, loud enough for her to hear, quiet enough for the camera to miss. Jordan didn't answer. She rolled out, reset her frame, and re-engaged. Logan advanced again. This time, he baited a reaction, half shot to the knee, pulled her hips forward, and faked a pass. He wasn't rushing. He wanted her to flail, wanted to dominate slowly, make it humiliating, make it clear. Jordan absorbed each motion, calculated, adjusted. She wasn't flashy. She was precise, like a weapon remembering how it was built. On the third advance, he drove forward for a body lock, expecting her to turtle. She sprawled instead, hard, and planted a knee that knocked him off rhythm. In that second, everything shifted. Jordan hooked his right leg with her left, pulled guard, and transitioned into a modified lasso. It wasn't pretty, but it stopped him. The room got quieter, not silent, just enough that the claps from Logan's corner lost their tempo. Jordan twisted, feinted a sweep, and instead locked in a deep triangle from bottom guard. Logan thrashed, kicked, then tried to stack, but the angle was wrong. She adjusted, tightened, his base faltered, and in front of every phone held up high, he tapped, loud, desperate. 14 seconds. That's all it took from the moment she engaged the triangle to when Logan's hand hit the mat. The golden boy folded, the image of male dominance, undone by a woman who never raised her voice. Jordan didn't rise with flair. She unclasped the choke slowly, pushed herself off the mat, and stood as Logan stayed slumped, breathing like a man dragged out of the ocean. Her ribs ached from the earlier takedown. A dull throb pulsed behind her left eye, but none of that mattered. The war wasn't physical. Behind the line of students, Brent Kessler stood with arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight the veins in his neck twitched. His boots tapped once against the concrete floor before he spat toward the edge of the mat. "One lucky choke doesn't make you a warrior," he muttered, loud enough for those close by to hear. Jordan didn't turn to look. She didn't need to. The venom in Brent's voice wasn't disappointing. It was fear, camouflaged in disdain. Coach Carson stepped forward, clapping just slow enough to seem reluctant. He nodded toward Logan. "Sometimes the mat humbles us all, but we use that to grow," he said, as if the speech had been recycled 100 times. Then his tone shifted. "To honor Logan's dedication and leadership, we'll open the floor for challenge night. Any ranked student may step forward for one live round. No time limit, submission only. Honor the art, honor the team. It was meant to be ceremonial." Brent stepped forward before Carson finished the sentence. "I want her." Gasps didn't come. They hung unspoken, stuck in the throats of people who knew what this really was. Carson paused. His eyes flicked from Brent to Jordan, then back. "That's unorthodox. We usually reserve challenges for—" "She's a fighter, right?" Brent interrupted. "She wants respect. Let's see if she earns it." Jordan finally turned. Her eyes met Brent's with the same calm that had shattered. "Logan, moments before, I accept," she said. And just like that, the circle tightened. Students formed rows, phones raised. Cody, off to the side, activated the wide-angle lens on his GoPro and quietly hit record. No one noticed Rachel Carson inching closer to the mat. Arms folded, lips tight. Brent rolled his neck. Carson gave a reluctant nod. The air wasn't celebratory anymore. It was thick with challenge, with tension, with the sound of something ancient waking up inside this modern space. Brent had slammed people into the pavement with less warning than this. But this time, there would be no gun, no badge, no partner with a turned-off body cam, just skill, muscle, and truth, all stripped down to skin, G, and breath. And in the 14 seconds that would follow, everything Brent believed about dominance would be undone. Because this time, he wouldn't be the one pressing the weight. He'd be the one trying to breathe. There was no ceremonial bow, no eye contact, no handshake. Just a low murmur from the crowd as Brent Kessler stepped onto the mat, like a man expecting applause before even earning a victory. His presence was swagger without substance. Shoulders rolled forward, jaw tight, fists clenched as if preparing for a bar fight. Not a martial art. The way he looked at Jordan wasn't that of a competitor. It was the way a man looks at something he thinks he owns. Jordan, in contrast, didn't move like someone entering a fight. She moved like someone returning to a familiar rhythm. Measured, balanced, alert, she adjusted her belt in silence, not to signal readiness, but respect, for herself, for the mat, and for everything this moment represented. Brent cracked his neck side to side, loud enough to draw attention, then sneered across the mat. "Hope you remember how to tap," he muttered, just loud enough for those near the edge to hear. His voice dripped with condescension. "Would hate to hurt a civilian." Carson gave a slight nod, and the circle formed tighter. Rachel stood to the side, arms crossed. Cody's camera was already rolling. Angle locked, no commentary, no dramatics, just evidence. The kind no one could spin. The moment the whistle sounded, Brent charged, not with timing, not with setup, with brute force. He lunged, grabbing for a double-leg takedown that would have flattened anyone who panicked. But Jordan didn't. She sprawled, hips low, blocking the shot, then pivoted, using his own forward momentum against him. Still, he adjusted, pushing forward, forcing her off balance. They crashed to the mat, his shoulder digging hard into her chest, his arm pressing across her jaw. It was ugly, but effective. For a second, he thought he had her pinned. He grunted, driving his forearm deeper into her throat. "Welcome to my mat," he hissed. But Jordan had been here before, just not with mats. She had felt the weight of men who thought strength meant domination. She had survived places where the rules were written in silence and the currency was power. Brent didn't understand the difference between pressure and control. She did. Her right foot snaked to his hip, her left leg swung up high, catching behind his neck. The triangle began, precise, coiled, deliberate. Brent pulled back instinctively, trying to posture up, but his arm was trapped. Jordan pivoted, adjusted the angle, locked her shin under her knee, and pulled his head forward. The audience didn't fully realize what they were watching, but Brent did. His hands clawed at her legs. He tried to rise. She angled her hips again. The space disappeared. Blood flow cut, breath shortened. Brent's eyes widened as his body betrayed him. He tapped once, then again, then a wild flurry, desperate, panicked. His legs kicked, his arm flailed. The room went silent. Jordan held the choke for half a second longer, just enough for certainty, then released. Brent rolled to his side, coughing, gasping, red-faced and dazed. He didn't stand, couldn't. He stayed curled, one hand gripping his chest, the other pounding the mat not in anger, but in shame. 14 seconds. That was all it took to strip a man of his illusion. 14 seconds to expose the difference between what he claimed to be and who he really was. The enforcer, the uniform, the bully, reduced to a spectacle on the floor, defeated by the very thing he thought he could humiliate. Jordan didn't pose, didn't gloat. She stood, adjusted her gi, and walked off the mat, calm, unshaken, behind her. No one spoke. Not Carson, not the students, not even Rachel. The kind of silence that doesn't come from respect, but disbelief. Brent stayed seated, his mouth hanging open, still blinking as if trying to rewrite what had just happened. And then, the flash from Cody's phone. The video was already saved, already time-stamped, already duplicated to a second drive. He uploaded the clip in real time. No filters, no cuts, just the unedited truth. Brent charging, Brent tapping, Brent unraveling. But Cody wasn't done. Back in his notes folder was a file labeled simply Audio, Locker Room. The same voice, now lying breathless on the mat, had once said, "Out there. People like her stay on the ground." That voice was about to meet its own echo. Cody synced the footage with the audio. Brent's humiliation wasn't just physical, it was ideological. A white cop boasting of force, a black woman showing restraint. The contrast was surgical. Carson remained frozen. He couldn't unsee what just played out. The room he once controlled now belonged to someone else. And worse, he couldn't name it, because if he did, he'd have to explain how his top student had been choked out by the very person he'd tried to erase. Jordan walked to the bench and sat alone, wrapping an ice pack around. Her ribs, pain was there, but not defeat. She had felt worse and lived. She'd been broken before and rebuilt in silence. But this wasn't about survival. This was about exposure. Brent finally stood, wobbling, his eyes darting around for dignity that had long since left the building. No one offered him a hand. No one helped him off the mat. The man who spent his life pinning others had just been flattened in front of the world. He stumbled out of the ring. No words, no eye contact, just shame trailing behind him like the sweat dripping down his back. One cop, one choke, one camera. No badge could protect him from that. And outside the gym, the internet was already beginning to watch, because this wasn't just another spar. It was a reckoning, tightened and sealed in under 14 seconds. But the truth was only getting started. Cody's finger hovered over the final render button. The footage was already going viral. But what he had next wasn't just proof, it was a confession. The internet never blinked. By the time Brent had staggered off the mat, sweat-soaked, gasping, humiliated, the footage had already crossed time zones. Cody didn't upload it with a caption. He didn't need to. The video spoke in a universal language, brutality exposed by precision, ego broken by discipline. It was the kind of raw moment that made people stop scrolling. 14 seconds. That's how long it took for the illusion to collapse. The chokehold, the tapping, the gasp, the silence of a room full of men who thought they owned the space. Now, watching one of their own crumble beneath the weight of a woman they never saw coming. But Cody had more than video. He had audio, Brent's voice, just days earlier, leaking through the cheap insulation of the locker room walls. Out there, people like her stay on the ground. That voice had come from the same man now lying on his back, red-faced and twitching, as if karma had scheduled an appointment and shown up early. Cody merged them. The video of the tap-out faded into black, then cut clean into the audio. Brent's words hung in the air like smoke, every syllable echoing louder when paired with the image of his defeat. He didn't just lose a match, he lost the narrative. The post was titled only with a timestamp, 14 seconds to truth. Within the first hour, it passed 100,000 views. By the second, Reddit threads were dissecting the choke technique, debating Brent's flawed posture, and posting memes. Jiu-Jitsu instructors from both coasts weighed in. Black belts praised Jordan's timing, her angle, her restraint, but more importantly, communities far outside the martial arts world began to listen, because it wasn't just about a match anymore. It was about power, about projection, about the violence that often hides behind performance and badge. And now, it was about a woman who never raised her voice, only her standard. Jordan watched it all in silence. She didn't need applause. She had never trained for it. Her life had been built on precision, not attention. But this moment wasn't about her ego. It was about the opening, the tear in the curtain, and what was finally visible behind it. Rachel called her that night. Her voice was tight, uncertain. "Carson's trying to issue takedowns," she said. "He's reported copyright claims on the video, claimed it's private class footage, but it's already mirrored. People are saving it faster than he can delete it." Jordan didn't laugh, but something in her chest eased. For once, the truth moved faster than the system. By midnight, Carson's gym page had gone dark. Their Yelp was flooded with reviews, some from real students, others from strangers who now saw the gym as a symbol of resistance. Brent's name became searchable across watchdog forums, his police department flooded with calls and emails, most asking one question: why is he still on the force? And then came the headlines. Cop choked out by black woman. During training, match goes viral. Spectre, the silent force behind the triangle. Jiu-Jitsu exposes power beyond the badge. Spectre, that name again. It first appeared in a reply thread beneath the video. One user wrote, "She moves like someone trained for war, not points." Another responded with a blurry image, Jordan in military fatigues, partially redacted. Below it, only one word: Spectre. No one knew the source, but those who paid attention knew it wasn't a nickname. It was a designation. Cody noticed it too. He clicked into the profile that posted the photo. No posts, no followers, just one message sent to Jordan's public email. He flagged it immediately. "Jordan," he said, knocking lightly on her door, "something you need to see." The photo loaded slowly. A soldier, kneeling beside a rusted truck in the middle of what looked like desert scrub. The image had no date, no tags, just a face, familiar, sun-scorched, squinting into light. Her brother, the man the military had declared missing, presumed dead, but he was alive. And next to the photo, one line in bold: "Not everything died in Syria. Want the rest? Follow the noise." Jordan didn't move for a long moment. Her fingers hovered over the image, not in disbelief, but in containment. For years, grief had been armor, but now it cracked. The world saw her as a fighter, a tactician, the one who walked back into a hostile mat and didn't blink. But at this moment, she was a sister again, a witness to something that rewrote everything, because while the internet debated triangle chokes and justice, someone else was watching, someone who knew what that triangle had really meant. Not a submission, but a signal. Cody watched her carefully. "That wasn't random," he said. "That name, that picture, they knew when to drop it." Right when the world was looking your way, Rachel called again, this time. No hesitation, "You're not just a story anymore," she said. "You're a trigger. Whatever this is, it started years ago. It's just now surfacing." By the time Jordan reached the perimeter of the base, the sun had folded behind the ridgeline, leaving the desert cloaked in that eerie midnight quiet where even the wind chose to watch in silence. The coordinates had led her here, nowhere on any official registry, yet unmistakably guarded. The old airstrip was cracked and overgrown, but the perimeter sensors still blinked like sentinels that never forgot how to see. This place wasn't abandoned. It was hiding in plain sight. A black SUV idled just inside the gate. As Jordan approached, two men stepped out, fully armed, faces blank, trained to recognize obedience, not conscience. They didn't ask for ID. They didn't need to. The moment they saw her, they opened the gate. They knew who she was. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered along a narrow corridor that once served as a hangar hallway. Now, it had the chilled precision of a surgical bunker. The walls had no insignias, no banners, just silence wrapped in steel. At the end of the corridor stood a single door, half open, inviting only because it didn't try to be. And behind that door, Colonel Marcus Avery. He looked exactly like memory warned, clean-shaven, silver streaks precisely parted, eyes that measured people like units of utility, not names. He was reading a file when she entered, not a laptop, not a screen, a printed dossier, because Avery didn't believe in leaks, only leverage. He didn't rise, he didn't offer a handshake. "You've aged well, Spectre," he said. His voice was cool, coated in the kind of authority that assumed it would be obeyed. Jordan stood still. "You sent the photo. I sent the truth," Avery replied. "What you choose to do with it, that's the story we're writing now." She took a step forward, slow and deliberate. "Where is he?" Avery set the file down and finally looked up. "Alive. Mostly. You know how debriefs go with soldiers trained to forget. He's not whole, but he's stable, contained. Like a weapon," she said. Avery didn't blink. "Like a legacy. You were the prototype. He was the refinement." Jordan's hands clenched by her side. "And now," Avery said, rising from his chair, "I offer you a deal. 1 year, reinstatement under Spectre classification. No tracking, no official file, just missions, just outcomes. At the end of 12 months, he walks free. Your record is buried. You both disappear." It was said like a favor, like a hand extended to someone drowning in grief. Jordan didn't answer. She looked at the table behind him. It held a single object, a dog tag. Her brother's, cleaned, placed like bait. "You trained us to survive," she said. "Then you abandoned us when survival didn't fit the narrative." Avery walked to the other side of the room and tapped a fingerprint scanner. A monitor flickered on, revealing a live feed. Elijah, seated in a sterile cell, head down, hands folded. "He doesn't remember you," Avery said, "but he remembers the field, the pain, the routine. We've kept him sharp." Jordan stepped forward. "You're not offering freedom. You're offering a transaction. My life, for another year of control." Avery shrugged. "Call it what you want, but remember, men like me don't beg. We don't chase, we replace." That was the moment she decided. Her heel shifted half an inch. Avery's eyes narrowed, but it was too late. The first guard at the door never saw the elbow. The second went down with a choke that lasted less than 3 seconds. Jordan ducked beneath the table, slid behind Avery, and had him pinned before he even reached for his comm. "This isn't a negotiation," she whispered into his ear. "This is your last blind spot." She jammed a flash drive into his workstation, downloaded what she could, then threw him back into the chair with the precision honed from years of erasing men who thought they could weaponize control. Alarms hadn't gone off yet because the system trusted him too much. That was their mistake. Jordan grabbed the dog tag and the drive, then slipped through the maintenance hatch on the west wall, a remnant from the original build that Avery had apparently overlooked. The crawl space was tight, but she moved like a breath, fast, silent. By the time boots thundered into the command room, she was gone, vanished into desert wind and night. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. What she held in her hand wasn't just a stolen file or a symbol of her brother's imprisonment. It was a map, a buried record of transfers, funding, movements, and, most importantly, coordinates. Not to this facility, but to one overseas, the real prison, the one where ghosts like Elijah were kept alive just enough to be studied, but not enough to be saved. Back in the truck, she'd hidden a mile from the perimeter. Jordan drove with her jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. Not because she was afraid of what came next, but because she finally saw the shape of the system. Avery wasn't selling obedience. He was selling hope. And like every man who played God with bodies and memories, he forgot one rule. Hope is not currency when handed to someone who already has nothing left to lose. She didn't need his contract. She didn't need his permission. She had the only thing they couldn't manufacture in bunkers and files and ghost units, conviction, and now she had coordinates, not just to her brother, but to every piece of the lie they built around him. And this time, she wasn't coming back to negotiate. She was coming back to dismantle the house from its foundation. She crossed the border under a moonless sky, headlights off, windshield dusted with dried blood of the desert she left behind. The coordinates extracted from Avery's stolen drive had pointed to a stretch of land not marked on any civilian satellite, just a blank on the map where governments choose to forget. It took 3 days to reach the outer perimeter, 3 days of silence, of preparing not for battle, but for the confrontation she feared most, looking her brother in the eyes and seeing nothing left of him behind them. Jordan parked on a ridge a kilometer out. Rachel handled the drone surveillance, her hands quick, mind colder than Jordan had expected from someone who once folded towels at the gym like prayers. Cody stayed with the backup gear. No one spoke unless they had to. The air was too thin for optimism, too full of static from the encrypted comms they'd hacked just to trace guard rotations. The compound was buried deep in a forested ravine, wrapped in fencing, shielded by fog generators and a false perimeter littered with wildlife deterrent sensors. The walls were plain concrete, but what they protected was anything but. Through binoculars, Jordan saw the patrols, not military, contractors, mercenaries, men paid more than enlisted soldiers and trained to forget why they ever cared about rules. They didn't wear insignias, but she recognized the build, the formation, the way they held their rifles like extensions of purpose. Emberlight wasn't just alive, it was thriving. The back gate was controlled by retinal scanners and biometric codes, but the compound had one weakness: supply deliveries. Once a week, a silent truck came in with no escort. That night, it rolled through the gate, and 30 seconds later, Jordan and Rachel dropped from the undercarriage like ghosts shedding steel. Inside, they didn't speak, they moved. Jordan still remembered the layout. Training protocols had burned those blueprints into her muscle memory. Left corridor, 2 guards, dispatch fast, without sound, right atrium. Camera blind spot near the generator, skip it, move low, heart rate was steady, breathing sharp. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't rescued yet either. This was navigation through the same hell she once called duty. Room 4C was labeled observation. Behind the glass, her brother. He sat at the center of a room too clean to be honest. His wrists were bound, not for restraint, but posture. Head level, eyes forward. His skin looked paler, the jaw leaner. His eyes scanned patterns on a wall of blinking lights. There was no reaction when she stepped to the door. No flicker, no shift in his spine, just absence. Rachel whispered, "It's him." Jordan stepped forward, whispered his name like a vow. Elijah. He didn't blink. Eli. "It's me." Jordan. His head turned slowly, mechanically. Recognition was supposed to be a jolt, a gasp, a tear, but what she saw instead was a hollowness engineered. His lips parted, and what came out wasn't a name, but a phrase. Spectre protocol active, awaiting directive. Her chest caved inward, not from fear, but the grief of knowing someone had carved out everything soft in him and replaced it with code. Rachel placed a hand on her shoulder, cautious. He doesn't know you. Jordan stood frozen. Every instinct told her to pull him up, carry him out, scream until something broke loose behind his stare. But she knew better. Memory doesn't return by force, and this wasn't a prison break, it was resurrection. Outside the corridor, boots echoed. They had seconds. Cody's voice crackled over the earpiece. They're shifting squads. You have one window. It's now or never. She looked at Elijah, the boy she taught to ride bikes, the teenager who carried their father's casket without flinching, the man who volunteered for war because he believed some systems could still be redeemed. Now, he sat still like a soldier-turned statue. Her voice dropped to a whisper only he could hear. They may have erased your name, but I remember every syllable. I remember the laugh that used to wake the house. I remember the scar above your eyebrow from falling off the fence at age 7, and I remember you told me you'd always find your way back. So now I'm here, and we're going to do that. Together. Still no change, but her hand didn't leave his shoulder. I'm not leaving you. Elijah, I'm pulling you out even if I have to drag your body through fire. She unlatched his restraints. His hands dropped, heavy but free. Rachel cursed under her breath. We have 30 seconds. We're going loud. Jordan hoisted Elijah to his feet. He moved like a man who hadn't walked freely in years, but his legs obeyed. They made it to the stairwell as the first shots rang out. Rachel returned fire. Jordan shielded Elijah, moving fast but fluid, as if each bullet was a clock counting down her window to reverse the damage. The exit wasn't graceful. It wasn't cinematic. It was survival scratched into concrete, written in blood and smoke. They didn't stop running until the trees swallowed the last edge of the compound. Cody was already revving the engine when they leapt into the van. Tires spit gravel. Jordan looked back once, only once, as the dark walls of the facility vanished behind the curve of the mountain road. She didn't breathe easily. There was no triumph in this escape because Elijah hadn't said a word. He sat beside her, rigid, staring forward. But when the van hit a bump and Jordan reached to steady him, his hand flinched, not in defense, but memory, something small, something familiar. She whispered again, I've got you. He didn't answer, but this time he didn't pull away. No blood had spilled, but her heart had torn open the moment his eyes didn't recognize her. And now she knew. The next war wouldn't be fought with fists or tactics. It would be fought inside the fragile chambers of a mind that someone else tried to own. She wasn't retreating. She was beginning the real mission, the one that would bring her brother back, one memory at a time. They crossed the final ridge just before dawn, a gray veil bleeding across the sky as if the horizon itself had stayed up all night in mourning. The underground medical shelter was tucked beneath a decommissioned power station, its rusted turbines now serving as camouflage for the most sacred kind of work, restoring what war had tried to erase. Elijah hadn't spoken since the extraction. His eyes tracked movement. His breathing was stable, but his silence felt like a wall Jordan couldn't scale. No recognition, no resistance. Just the echo of the phrase he'd been programmed to repeat, awaiting directive. Inside the compound, a former trauma unit had been converted into a neuro reset station. Cody had reached out to a specialist, Dr. Celine Moreau, a cognitive linguist and trauma therapist who once consulted on deprogramming child soldiers in West Africa. She didn't flinch when she saw Elijah. She just asked for time, data, and complete quiet. Jordan sat beside her brother through it all. The electrodes, the sensory triggers, the flash memory probes, none of it broke through. Dr. Moreau ran simulations, sound pattern tests, even deep recall IV-induced memory echoes. Elijah's mind pushed back with perfect obedience. No cracks in the code, until Jordan took the clipboard from the doctor and said, "He's not a subject, He's my brother. Let me try. Dr. Moreau stepped aside. Jordan leaned close, not with desperation, but with memory. Elijah, do you remember the fence we used to climb? The old chain link behind our building? You fell once, cut your arm on the twist. You lied to Mom and said it was a cat, but I remember you crying when she left for work. And I remember wrapping your arm with paper towels and tape because we couldn't afford bandages. I told you, if you ever got hurt again, you had to cry louder, so the world would listen. No response. She kept going. You called me Jay. No one else did. That was our name. Just for us. When Dad left, you wrote on the wall in pencil, Jay's got me, always. Still nothing. Jordan stood up, walked to the corner of the room, and came back with something wrapped in canvas. Her old duffel, the one from Spectre days, inside. She pulled out 2 items, her own Spectre belt, and his, burned at the edge, but intact. Elijah Hayes, Spectre Unit, codename Flint, assigned March 18, Syria Theater, partnered with Spectre J, Protocol 19, cover and extraction pairs, no man left behind. Mission Oath. For every mission they erase, we remember too. Something changed in his eyes, not recognition, but resistance. A twitch in his jaw, a subtle repositioning of his foot, small, precise muscle patterns only Jordan would notice. Combat micro-behaviors trained into him over years. She leaned in. Protocol 14. Memory reinforcement sequence. Respond. Flint, do you copy? His head tilted slightly. Protocol 14. Jordan reached out, gently touched his chest. I'm Jay. You're Flint. They took you from me, but I'm still here. Say it with me. He hesitated, then whispered. No man left behind. A breath caught in her throat, but she didn't let it steal her voice. That's right. And right now, you're in the middle of extraction. You are not the machine they built. You are the man I bled for. You are my blood. The tremble in his hands grew. His eyes fluttered, flickering like film stuttering into motion. Then he whispered again, louder this time. Jay's got me. The words landed like thunder in her chest, but they had no time to weep, because Cody burst into the room with a face that only ever came before the sirens. They found us. Convoy. 10 minutes out. Dr. Moreau grabbed her files. If we move now, I can burn the hard lines, scrub the records, but we can't hold this place. Jordan turned to Elijah. You ready to move? He stood, still shaky, but upright. Lead the way. Jay. The exit tunnel was tight, lit by emergency lights that pulsed red against steel. Jordan took point. Rachel covered the rear. Cody rerouted their GPS decoys from his laptop as they moved. Halfway down the tunnel, a breach alert buzzed in their comms. They're in the compound, Rachel warned. 2 squads, fully armed. Jordan turned to Elijah. You remember what we practiced in Spectre training? He nodded slowly. Disarm, disabled, disappear. Then he moved. Not like a man regaining memory, but like one reclaiming muscle born in war. He dropped the first mercenary in the flank hallway with a sweep kick and choke hold so silent the body collapsed without a sound. Jordan followed his lead. 2 moves later, Cody had eyes on their escape van, parked beneath an overpass 100 meters east. They broke into the clearing as bullets carved bark from the trees around them. Elijah grabbed Cody's collar, shoved him toward the vehicle, then turned and shielded Jordan as she fired back toward the tree line. By the time they hit the van, Elijah was bleeding from the shoulder, but his grip was firm. His breath was even, and when Jordan turned to ask if he was okay, he said, "Not yet, but I remember the fence, and the scar, and the lie about the cat." She laughed. It was the first sound in days that didn't feel like war. As the van peeled away from the burning ruins of what was once another hidden facility in a long chain of secrets, Jordan held her brother's hand. He still had gaps, still had silence, but one thing was no longer missing. He knew who he was, and he remembered who she was. Now, it wasn't just about rescue, it was about testimony, exposure, a reckoning that couldn't be stopped with bullets or bunkers, because some truths don't need permission to come roaring back to life. The chamber inside City Hall had never held so much heat, yet no one touched the thermostat. It was the kind of tension that didn't come from weather or poor ventilation, but from history pressing its full weight against the glass walls of power. Rows of chairs filled with activists, journalists, retired soldiers, and quiet citizens who had seen too much and said too little for far too long. This wasn't a courtroom, it wasn't even a trial, but it was public, and in a country that often pretended not to hear, that alone was a battleground. Jordan walked in without body armor, but every step she took sounded like boots on gravel. Her brother, Elijah, moved beside her, not fully healed, not fully safe, but fully present. Behind them were Rachel and Cody, both carrying the weight of months spent unearthing data meant to stay buried beneath layers of clearance, classification, and denial. Across the room sat the city council, flanked by police officials and representatives from the mayor's office. Cameras blinked, mics clicked on, but it wasn't the equipment that would change things. It was what couldn't be turned off, the eyes of the people who'd gathered, the quiet power of collective breath held between injustice and justice. Rachel opened the presentation with surgical precision. She introduced Project Emberlight by name, walked through the structural contracts, the off-book funding, the geographic code words. Every time she said Spectre, the room tilted, not because of the name itself, but because of what it implied. Soldiers erased, deployed without accountability, used until broken, then buried in redacted files. Then Jordan stepped forward, holding nothing but a flash drive and a name. Colonel Marcus Avery, she said, the man who ran the program, the man who tried to sell my brother's freedom back to me like it was merchandise. She loaded the file Cody had compiled, recorded footage from the Nevada base, time-stamped overlays of military black sites, audio of Avery offering a deal laced in coercion and control. The room stayed quiet, but the silence was no longer comfortable for those sitting in power. And then came Brent. Cody pulled up the second file. Not just the 14-second match where Jordan choked him out in front of a cheering crowd, but the locker room recording. Brent laughed about slamming black teens to the ground, bragging about how internal affairs never looked too hard when the badge was white enough. The voice was unmistakable. His uniform didn't protect him here. Not anymore. A councilwoman asked if the recording had been verified. It's his voice, Jordan answered, but it's our blood. And for the first time, it didn't feel like hyperbole. It felt like evidence. The police chief, seated at the end of the table, shifted in his seat, cleared his throat. These are serious accusations, but I don't believe this forum is the place to... Someone in the back stood up. A mother, black, dignified, quiet until now. My son died in Brent Kessler's custody, she said, and no one ever gave me a forum. The room inhaled, another voice joined, then another, and another. People who had sat for years with their pain in silence now poured it into the air like gasoline, and all Jordan had to do was strike the match by standing there, not yelling, not demanding, just enduring. That was the revolution. The chief folded his arms. These aren't proven in a court of law. Jordan met his gaze and replied, neither were the bruises, but they stayed. The mayor's aide looked ready to adjourn, but the room had already shifted beyond protocol. This wasn't just a council meeting anymore. It was a referendum, and the people had already voted. With their presence, their voices, and their refusal to sit down when told they were out of order. Jordan didn't stay to hear the conclusion. She didn't need to. The system wasn't going to absolve itself in one session. That wasn't the point. The point was to bring the lie into the light and let the light do what it always eventually does, burn. That night, Jordan sat on the back porch of a small house tucked beneath the ridge where the city skyline disappeared into open land. She and Elijah watched the wind move over the fields. No words passed between them for the first hour. But then Elijah spoke. "You still call me Flint?" Jordan smiled. "Always." And in that moment, nothing else was required. Not clearance, no apology, just space, and the kind of silence that came not from oppression, but from peace that had been earned. The battle in City Hall was only the beginning. A deeper one was coming. But before the next war, there had to be stillness, a breath before the storm, a moment to remember why the fight mattered in the first place, and somewhere, in a city office, Brent's name was being typed into an internal suspension log. But out here, on the porch, Jordan didn't care about the paperwork, because when truth finally stood where lies used to hide, it didn't need a badge to be believed. By late afternoon, Mat 14 was full, not just with bodies, but with presence. The golden light slipped in through the windows, catching dust in midair like suspended breath. This was no longer a gym built to crown power. It had become a refuge, rebuilt from trauma, repurposed through truth. Jordan stood near the edge of the mat, watching as people filled the space once used to isolate her, survivors, witnesses, allies. Some were new students. Some were family members of those Brent had targeted, whose stories had once been buried beneath silence and shame. They weren't here for revenge. They came to stand in the open. Finally, Cody adjusted the mic. Rachel crossed off names from a small list, one by one. Stories were spoken, no headline sound bites, just testimony, honest, raw. Near the back wall, a printed announcement was taped up hastily. It read, "Brent Kessler, suspended without pay pending investigation. Federal review underway on actions tied to multiple civil rights violations." Below it, another name, Colonel Marcus Avery, under federal investigation for covert detainment and unauthorized military experimentation. No applause followed, just a quiet wave of breath. Relief that sounded like justice beginning to stir. Logan arrived alone, belt tucked under his arm, no longer slung across his waist. He asked to rejoin, not as a fighter, but as a student. He bowed his head when he spoke. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. And when it came time for Jordan to step forward, she did not carry a speech. She did not accept the plaque offered to her by a city official who hadn't shown up when the first video dropped. She simply walked to the center of the mat, where her journey had once begun, with 100 silent eyes waiting for her to fail. This time, the silence waited to honor her. She picked up a marker and wrote one line across the wooden panel that now replaced the belt rack near the exit. "This isn't about belts. It's about belonging." Then she faced the room and spoke with the same calm force that had brought down a system. "I'm not here to dominate," she said. "I'm here to build what they tried to erase." No one clapped, no one shouted. They simply bowed their heads, not from fear, but from respect. Justice doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes it walks in with nothing but scars, silence, and a will that refuses to be broken. Jordan Hayes didn't come to that mat seeking revenge. She came to reclaim space for herself, for her brother, for every voice that was silenced by power dressed as law. What started as a fight inside a gym became a reckoning that reached city halls, federal files, and the hearts of those who watched a black woman dismantle the system with nothing but truth and discipline. This story wasn't about rank, it was about dignity and the strength to stand even when the world says kneel. What would you have done if you stood in her place? If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe, because voices like hers deserve to be heard everywhere.